68-year-old Chong Mo-young was an avid hunter from Lansing, Michigan. Unfortunately, a hunting trip to Rose Lake State Park in Bath Township, Michigan would end in a horrible tragedy. On November 16, 2018, Chong set out for his usual hunting session between 3 and 4 p.m. that afternoon. However, when he failed to return home later that evening, his wife grew concerned. His family began searching, and it wasn't long before they found his vehicle. In the park's parking lot, following footprints in the snow, they made a heartbreaking discovery: Chong's lifeless body lying face down with a gunshot wound to his head. The shocking death stunned the Bath Township community, especially within Michigan's hunting circles. Investigators worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery surrounding Chong's killing, but the case went cold for several years. It wasn't until witness testimony, a critical piece of evidence, and the discovery of a plastic bag with hunting spray near the scene that investigators honed in on a suspect, 35-year-old Thomas Olson of Grand Blanc Township. Investigators determined that Olson killed Chong and stole his belongings, including his headlamp, knife, backpack, and shotgun. They were able to identify him using DNA found on the plastic bag. They also discovered text messages between him and his friend Robert Rodway that hinted at both of them being involved in the murder. One message included a photo of the two men in hunting gear at Rose Lake with the caption, "A couple of cold-blooded killers revisiting the crime scene," while another referred to a poster seeking tips about Chong's killing, saying "They haven't caught ya," later updated to us. The content of these messages, coupled with Olson's search for news about the death before authorities publicly released information, was quite damning. In December 2022, both men were arrested and charged with murder. However, in September 2023, Rodway's charges were dropped due to issues with evidence admissibility. In February 2025, Olson was found guilty of second-degree murder and felony firearm possession. He was then sentenced to 22.5 to 60 years in prison, with an additional 2 years for the firearm possession. For the Young family and many others in the hunting community, the conviction brought a sense of closure, though the pain of their loss would never truly fade. Danita Monique Smith was born on November 20, 1981 to Sharon Cook and Calvin Smith. A native of Charlotte, North Carolina, Danita was known for her intelligence, kindness, and determination. After graduating from West Charlotte High School in 2000, she went on to earn her bachelor's degree in English from North Carolina Central University in Durham. Danita was a bright, driven young woman, deeply devoted to her family, her faith, and her goals. She regularly attended University Park Baptist Church and was passionate about her future career. She returned to NCCU as a full-time graduate student, working towards her master's degree while serving as a photojournalist for the campus newspaper. In her personal life, Danita seemed just as grounded. She was newly engaged to Jameer Stroud, a Greensboro police officer whom she often described as the perfect man. To friends and family, it looked like she had everything lined up: a promising career, a loving fiancé, and strong family support. What Danita didn't realize was that her relationship had hidden complications. Before proposing to Danita, Dermier had been romantically involved with a woman named Shannon Crawley, a 911 dispatcher who lived in Greensboro. The relationship between Dermier and Shannon had ended, but Shannon struggled to move on. She was fully aware of Dermier's engagement and couldn't seem to let go of the past. Things reportedly took a turn when Shannon saw Dermier and Danita together at church, holding hands. This moment appeared to have fueled Shannon's growing jealousy. On January 4, 2007, around 8:10 a.m., a maintenance worker at Danita's apartment complex, Campus Crossings, heard a gunshot. Shortly after, he noticed a woman running away from the building and driving off in a burgundy Ford Explorer, visibly upset. At first, there was confusion, with some thinking there may have been an accident. It wasn't until later that morning, around 10 a.m., that another resident discovered Danita at the bottom of the apartment stairwell, her belongings scattered around her. What initially looked like a possible fall was soon revealed to be something far more sinister. Danita had been fatally shot. As police began their investigation, they quickly learned about Danita's connection to Dermier Stroud. and soon after about Jermier's past relationship with Shannon Crawley. Plus, the burgundy Ford Explorer that was spotted leaving the scene was found to be registered to Shannon. When detectives brought her in for questioning, they immediately noticed inconsistencies in her story. She claimed she'd been late to work that morning because she was taking her child to a doctor's appointment, but the pediatrician's office confirmed she never showed up. Cell phone records placed Shannon in Durham both the day before and the day of the incident, suggesting she had been in the area more than once. A search of her home turned up uniforms matching the description given by the maintenance worker. And investigators also found out she'd purchased a .38 revolver just a few months earlier, the same caliber as the weapon used. 5 days after Danita's death, Shannon was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She pleaded not guilty, insisting that Jermier was the real culprit. She claimed he forced her to drive him to Durham and threatened her and her children. She even accused him of later attacking her. But investigators uncovered no credible evidence to support her story, with her phone records, witness testimony, and physical evidence contradicted her claims. In the end, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In June 1985, the quiet town of Greyhawk, Kentucky was shaken by a tragedy that would forever alter the lives of the Morris family. Edwin and Bessie Morris, ages 65 and 69, two beloved pillars of their community, were brutally murdered in their own home. The shocking details of their deaths, which included being tied up, beaten, and shot in cold blood, sent ripples of horror through the peaceful town, as the case marked the first double homicide in Jackson County's history. Edwin and Bessie, known for their kindness and community spirit, had built their lives running a grocery store, post office, and gas station. They were a lifeline to many, often helping those in need and hiding cash and styrofoam cups in their freezer to avoid theft. On June 16, 1985, the killers gained access to the Morrises' home, claiming they had run out of gas. This deceitful plea was met with the kindness of Edwin and Bessie, who invited the strangers in. But what followed was unspeakable violence. Once inside, the suspects gagged Edwin and tied his hands behind his back. He was later found dead on the kitchen floor. Bessie, on the other hand, was found on a bed in the bedroom with her hands and feet tied together behind her back. Edwin had been shot twice in the head, while Bessie was shot twice in the back. Ballistics determined that the murder weapons were a .38 caliber gun and a .357. They also found 9mm Luger bullets. It appears the killers used pillows to try and muffle the sound of the gunshots. Missing from the home was a diamond cluster ring, a set of diamond earrings, and a .38 caliber handgun. The crime was eventually traced back to Benny Lee Hodge, Donald Bartley, and Roger Epperson. The three men had gone to the Morris home with the purpose of robbing them. Once inside, the men knocked Edwin to the kitchen floor. Bartley, who was still outside, said he heard gunshots at that point. Once the men returned, they had a sack full of money estimated to contain $35,000. They also stole the ring, earrings, and a .38 caliber handgun. That gun, along with the two murder weapons, was tossed in the river at the bridge that goes into the Daniel Boone National Forest. After that, they burned Hodge's shirt and shoes. Hodge's wife, Sherry Hamilton, later said that he admitted to the murder following a scuffle with Edwin. He said it was he and Bartley and not Epperson who committed the murder. Once Edwin was dead, Bartley allegedly took Bessie in the bedroom and fatally shot her. Hodge also shot Bessie to ensure she was dead. After the crime, Sherry was given the ring and earrings that was stolen from the Morrises' home. In a chilling turn of events, one of the perpetrators was revealed to be the son of Edwin's best friend. Before the men were arrested, they also murdered Tammy D. Acker. On August 8, 1985, between 9 and 10 p.m., the men broke into the Acker home where she and her father, Dr. Roscoe J. Acker, were. Once inside, they forced Dr. Acker to open his safe, allowing the men to steal several $1,000s. Tammy was then fatally stabbed, while Dr. Acker was choked until he passed out. He woke up 40 minutes later, escaped from his bonds, and sadly found Tammy dead with a knife in her back. Thankfully, Dr. Acker survived the attack. After murdering Tammy, the men were quickly located, arrested, and charged with the murders. In the end, both Roger Epperson and Benny Hodge was convicted and sentenced to death. Donald Bartley was also convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Epperson and Hodge were tried 3 times and were sentenced to death each time. Harold Allen, who went by Herb, was born on September 29, 1970 in Scottsburg, Indiana. He grew up in a close-knit family and had a strong work ethic and a love for his career at Ishin, USA. He was married to Marcia Allen, who, on the surface, seemed to share a normal, happy life with him. However, the tragic events that unfolded later revealed a different story. On December 20, 2022, 52-year-old Harold was found unconscious in the home he shared with Marcia in Freetown, Indiana. Initial reports indicated that he had passed away from natural causes. However, the circumstances surrounding his death soon sparked suspicion, prompting a deeper investigation that would uncover a chilling plot. It wasn't until the following year, 2023, that the truth began to emerge. On September 19, 2023, Marcia reported a burglary at their home. 2 men, Stephen White and Nathaniel Napier, had stolen firearms and jewelry. During questioning, one of the burglars revealed a startling piece of information. Ashley Jones, Marcia's daughter, had confided in him that her mother had murdered her husband by poisoning him. This confession triggered an investigation into Harold's death. As police dug deeper, they uncovered a string of incriminating text messages between Marcia and Ashley that painted a sinister picture. The two had been plotting Harold's murder for months, and the details were shockingly elaborate. In late November 2022, Marcia texted Ashley asking her to procure foxglove seeds, a toxic plant. However, Ashley warned her that the seeds were traceable. In the same text thread, they discussed using ethylene glycol, a deadly substance commonly found in antifreeze, as a means to poison Harold. On December 13, 2022, Marcia ordered a gallon of ethylene glycol for $31.99, and the 2 women planned to use it in a root beer float, a drink Harold loved. Just days later, on December 19th, Ashley texted her mother, excitedly reporting that the substance had arrived. Marcia responded with enthusiasm, sending a heart emoji, indicating how eager they were to proceed with the plan. The following day, Marcia prepared the root beer float, spiking it with the ethylene glycol. According to the affidavit, Harold began acting drunk and loopy shortly after consuming the drink. Marcia then waited 5 hours before calling 911. Ashley had even bragged about how she would be able to access his hidden accounts after his death. However, police would never be able to arrest Marcia because she took her own life on October 16, 2023. Just 1 day before her death, Marcia had been questioned by police. Ashley was also interviewed and admitted to ordering the poison, but claimed her mother was the one who had actually administered it. However, investigators had enough on her as well. They had discovered an exchange that took place in November 2022, when Ashley texted her mother about the big plan and expressed her impatience with the slow pace of their efforts. Marcia responded with frustration, saying, "I need this to be over. I wish it would reach its climax and be done, It was clear that they were both eagerly awaiting the moment when their plan would come to fruition. 2 days after her mother took her own life, Ashley was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including 2 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and consumer product tampering. Further investigation revealed that Ashley had been involved in another suspicious death, the death of her husband, Tierson Jones, in 2019. Tierson was found dead just days after receiving an inheritance from his great-grandfather. Ashley's actions surrounding his death raised red flags, as she had quickly cremated his body before his family could request an autopsy. She claimed Tierson had died from alcohol poisoning, but his family remained suspicious. At the time, Tierson's uncle, William White, spoke out, saying that Ashley had prevented the family from investigating his death, and had even hurriedly arranged the cremation. Law enforcement has stated they are aware of the claims surrounding Tierson's death, but no investigation has been formally opened. Currently, Ashley's trial date is set for August 4, 2025, and while the focus remains on Harold's murder, her husband's death remains open. Early 2022, 26-year-old Thomas Pearson III lived in Evesham Township, New Jersey, where he was an aspiring writer and solar energy salesman. Thomas was originally from Medford Lakes, New Jersey, and was known for his kindness. He was a self-published author on the topic of New Jersey's solar industry and was an active social media figure who shared his thoughts and perspectives on a range of topics. In 2020, he adopted a dog he named Django and proudly introduced him as his guard dog. The two had an unbreakable bond until a horrible tragedy occurred. On the morning of February 5, 2022, police responded to a call shortly after 9 a.m. regarding a possible dog bite. However, what they discovered was far more sinister. On the stairwell landing of the apartment complex lay Thomas in a pool of blood near his dog, who was also dead. Investigators quickly pieced together the horrifying details, including a 911 call from an upstairs neighbor who had heard commotion just before the attack. That's also how they identified the suspect as 27-year-old Donovan G. Hollingsworth, who was friends with Thomas. Apparently, Hollingsworth had been struggling financially when he went to Thomas's apartment to rob him. At that point, Hollingsworth began viciously attacking Pearson, stabbing him repeatedly. Django, Pearson's loyal guard dog, rushed to defend his owner but was fatally stabbed in the process. Authorities eventually located Hollingsworth at a nearby hospital after he sought medical help for minor injuries. Investigators also discovered a phone call he had made with his father where he confessed to the murder. However, he claimed that a confrontation over marijuana escalated into a violent struggle with Pearson allegedly attacking him. He also told his father that the dog bit him in the process. Regardless of his claim, in August 2023, he was convicted of first-degree murder, first-degree robbery, cruelty to animals, and other charges. The judge sentenced him to 34 years in state prison, 30 of which were for the murder, with no possibility of parole, and an additional 4 years for the killing of Django. Christine Schultz was born on November 15, 1950. At age 30, she was a mother of 2 living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where she was trying to make a fresh start after a difficult divorce from her first husband, Alfred Schultz, a Milwaukee police detective who went by Fred. Christine had custody of their 2 sons and was now dating a man named Stuart Honeck. Unfortunately, she would never get to enjoy her new life, because in the spring of 1981, a horrible tragedy occurred. On May 27, 1981, Christine had spent the evening with Stuart before returning home to her sons. Around 2 a.m., an intruder entered her home, bound her hands, gagged her with a bandana, and shot her in the back with a .38 caliber revolver. Her 2 sons, Sean and Shannon, sadly witnessed the aftermath. Sean later recalled hearing a loud noise like a firecracker and saw a masked man fleeing the house. At first glance, there appeared to be no obvious motive. No valuables were stolen, and there was no sign of forced entry, suggesting a crime of passion or something intended to silence Christine. However, the details of her murder would set off a series of events that would lead to accusations, trials, and a media sensation. Sean's description of the intruder as a tall man with reddish-brown hair tied in a ponytail did not immediately provide any clear leads. But the investigation took a dramatic turn when the focus shifted to her ex-husband's second wife, Lori Benbenick, who went by Bambi. Bambi was a former police officer and ex-Playboy bunny, whose name would become synonymous with the case. Bambi had this to say: "I worked as a waitress at the Playboy Club for just 3 weeks, but it seemed like I'd always be remembered as the Playboy bunny." This brief stint would become a defining part of her public narrative, one the media eagerly clung to. In March 1980, she joined the Milwaukee police force, eager to prove herself in a male-dominated field. However, after only a few months, Bambi was dismissed during her probationary period and filed a sex discrimination complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, alleging her dismissal was rooted in gender bias rather than performance issues. After leaving the police department, Bambi's life took another dramatic turn when she became involved with Fred. Their relationship escalated quickly, and within 3 months of Fred's divorce from Christine, he married Bambi on January 29, 1981. Their whirlwind relationship would soon lead to a scandal and tragedy. As the investigation into Christine's murder progressed, Bambi's connection to the crime became more apparent. She had reportedly expressed jealousy over the financial support Fred was still providing Christine, including alimony payments. They also located witnesses who said Bambi had talked about blowing Christine's head off and had even approached people about hiring someone to kill her. The breakthrough in the investigation came when a reddish-brown wig was found clogging the plumbing of the apartment building where Bambi lived. Fibers from the wig were found to match those discovered at the crime scene. Further forensic analysis linked Bambi's hair to that found on Christine's gag. The final piece of evidence came when Fred's off-duty revolver was found to be the murder weapon. Bambi had access to the gun and the ballistics matched the fatal shot. In late June 1981, Bambi was arrested. The investigation also revealed troubling details about Fred's alibi. While he had claimed to be on duty the night of the murder, he later admitted to lying about his whereabouts, revealing he had been drinking at a bar with a fellow officer. Despite Fred's lies, he was cleared of direct involvement, and all evidence pointed toward Bambi as the killer. On March 9, 1982, after a 3-week trial, Bambi was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her case became a media sensation, with Bambi becoming a controversial figure. Many believed she was wrongfully convicted and rallied behind her. T-shirts emblazoned with "Run Bambi Run" were sold, and a Bambi look-alike contest was held in her honor. In 1990, Bambi escaped from Tachita Correctional Institution with the help of her fiancé, Dominique Gugliotto. The two fled to Canada where they spent 3 months on the run before being captured in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Supporters continued to rally for her, convinced she had been the victim of a miscarriage of justice. After her capture and extradition, Bambi was granted a judicial review, which revealed significant mistakes in the original investigation. While no conspiracy was proven, the errors in handling evidence were enough to warrant a new trial. Rather than face the possibility of a second conviction, Bambi pled no contest to second-degree murder in 1992. She was released after serving just over 10 years in prison. Despite her release, Bambi continued to maintain her innocence. In 2002, after completing her parole, she filed a motion seeking DNA testing to clear her name. In the midst of this legal battle, she was severely injured while attempting to escape during a Dr. Phil show appearance. The fall resulted in the amputation of her right foot. Bambi's case continued to make headlines with her attorney pushing for a pardon. Despite her efforts, Bambi's request for posthumous pardons remained unanswered. Her legal fight to clear her name was fueled by new DNA evidence, but no conclusive match has yet been made. Bambi died on November 20, 2010 in hospice care after battling liver and kidney failure, a complication of hepatitis C. Her death did little to quiet the controversy surrounding her case, with many still believing she was wrongfully convicted. To this day, her story remains one of the most discussed and debated in Wisconsin's criminal history. Christine Schultz's murder was ultimately solved with the conviction of Bambi, but questions about the investigation, Bambi's role, and the involvement of others still linger. As the case continues to unfold, some wonder if there's more to the story than what has been revealed. Was Bambi framed? And if she wasn't the killer, then who was? Here are reasons people believe she is innocent. They believe the evidence was weak considering it was only the wig and Christine's hair on a pair of her pants. Some believe she was framed for her accusations of gender discrimination while on the Milwaukee force. Some believe she wasn't really that jealous of Christine. There were also allegedly conflicting witness testimonies, and some even recanted or later altered their stories. Some have also criticized the defense team for not aggressively challenging the prosecution's evidence. It was also said that some jurors were shifted because of her prior work as a waitress at a Playboy club. Some point to the polygraph she passed, while others point to the individuals who reportedly confessed or implicated themselves in the crime but were never formally charged. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. At the age of 31, Catherine Donahue lived in Arlington, Virginia, where she worked as a secretary. She was known for her warmth and hardworking nature and had her whole life ahead of her before she encountered a very evil individual. Unfortunately, there isn't much public information available about her personal life, including whether she ever married or had children. Regardless, on March 3, 1979, Catherine's body was discovered by someone walking through a parking lot in the 8400 block of Hamlin Street in Glen Arden, Virginia. She had been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. Law enforcement quickly responded, launching an investigation that included collecting forensic evidence, interviewing potential witnesses, and following numerous leads. However, despite their efforts, the case quickly grew cold. The forensic technology of the time, particularly DNA testing, was not advanced enough to provide meaningful evidence or identify a suspect. As the years passed, the case grew colder and Catherine's family was left to cope with the tragedy of not knowing who murdered their loved one. That is until 2024, when the Prince George's County Police Department's Cold Case Unit decided to revisit the case with modern forensic advancements. Evidence from the crime scene was sent to Othram and a comprehensive genetic profile was created. This profile was then submitted to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team, who worked tirelessly to track down potential relatives of the suspect. Their hard work paid off when they identified Roger Otis Brown, now in his 80s, as a person of interest. While Brown was never considered a suspect during the original investigation, he did live in the area about 15 miles from Arlington. A DNA sample was then obtained from Brown and confirmed the match, conclusively linking him to Catherine's murder. Brown has been charged with first-degree murder and sexual assault. Plus, investigators are now looking into whether he may be connected to any other unsolved crimes from that time period. As of now, he remains in jail, awaiting the outcome of the case. Martika Ferguson, known as Tyka, was born on May 20, 1993 in Colorado Springs, Colorado to Leela Edwards and Gothy Barksdale. She was then adopted by David and Effie Ferguson in 1999. At age 27, she lived in Enid, Oklahoma and was the mother of a young son, Devontae. Described as having a joyful personality and a brilliant smile, Martika loved to sing and dance and found solace in music. She was a former high school cheerleader and was known for her artistic spirit, vibrant personality, and deep devotion to her child. However, her promising life was tragically cut short when she was shot and left for dead in an alley. An autopsy later confirmed that the weapon used was a shotgun. Investigators quickly identified a suspect after analyzing surveillance footage from nearby businesses and residences. The suspect was 30-year-old Shanedale Perosi, a convicted felon with a criminal history, including a child abuse conviction in 2010 and an assault on an officer charged in 2016. Notably, Perosi's residence was just a block away from where Tyka's body was found. On December 2, 2020, SWAT officers executed a no-knock warrant at Perosi's home, arresting him on charges of first-degree murder, destruction of evidence, and possession of a firearm after a felony conviction. Surveillance footage played a crucial role in the investigation, capturing Tyka walking alone before encountering a biker wearing a black jacket and a cowboy hat. Later identified as Perosi, the two were seen walking toward Hallmark Baptist Church and then into an alley where they moved out of the camera's view. 12 minutes later, Perosi was seen alone, leaving the scene on his motorcycle. Investigators received an anonymous tip that helped identify Perosi. The tipster revealed that he and Tyka had dated in the past and she occasionally stayed at his residence, which was set up in a garage. The tipster also stated that Perosi had sent threatening messages, including one that ominously mentioned, "You might end up like your girl Tyka. I hear they found her dead yesterday." Upon searching Perosi's home, authorities found evidence linking him to the crime, including the distinctive jacket seen in the surveillance footage. When confronted with the evidence, Perosi confessed to killing Martika. His statements to investigators were chilling. He said he was glad he killed her and did it to teach her a lesson. He further expressed frustration with people he referred to as tweakers, whom he accused of stealing from him. Perosi alleged that a friend had caught Martika inside his home the day before her death, leading him to ban her from his residence. He stated that she was only permitted to be near the church, but not his house. Despite his admission of guilt, Perosi attempted to shift partial blame on Martika, claiming that she had grabbed the gun after he cocked it and that it accidentally discharged. Nonetheless, his statements and actions made it clear that the killing was intentional. In the end, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Pauline Brassett was born on September 1, 1959, of Metis descent. Although she was Metis, she and her family did not grow up within First Nations culture. At 16, Pauline was a young mother from Saskatchewan who had recently relocated to Calgary, Alberta, Canada in the fall of 1975 with her infant daughter and older sister. On January 8, 1976, Pauline spent the evening at her aunt's house partying with friends. Around 2:30 a.m., she and another person decided to go eat pizza at Pepe's restaurant located at 7th Street and 17th Avenue in Calgary. After finishing their meal, they left together, but Pauline soon realized she had forgotten her gloves. She returned to the restaurant alone, heavily intoxicated, to retrieve them. Unable to find them, she left and began walking back to her aunt's house. Sadly, she would never arrive. Approximately 5 hours later, on January 9, 1976, Pauline's partially clothed body was found on Jumping Pond Forestry Road, a remote area located about 22 miles southwest of Cochrane, Alberta. She had been stabbed to death, and an autopsy confirmed the manner of death was homicide. Pauline's murder was among a series of unsolved cases in the Calgary area during the 1970s and early 1980s. Authorities suspected that her case was linked to the so-called highway murders, a series of killings in which young women were sexually assaulted and left in remote locations along the Trans-Canada Highway. However, despite extensive investigations, no suspect was identified at the time and the case eventually went cold. In 1995, a task force was formed to investigate historical homicides, including Pauline's case, but it remained unsolved. In 2021, the Alberta Royal Canadian Mounted Police Historical Homicide Unit partnered with the Calgary Police Service Cold Case Homicide Unit to reanalyze unsolved murders from the 1970s, leveraging new advancements in forensic technology. In 2022, investigators turned to Othram, whose scientists developed a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown suspect. That profile was then analyzed by forensic genealogists from Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy. By 2023, investigators had identified a suspect, 73-year-old Ronald James Edwards of Sundre, Alberta. Unfortunately, no photo of Edwards was released. On November 7, 2023, he was arrested and charged with 9 capital murder, the classification used in the criminal code at the time of Pauline's death. Authorities revealed that Edwards had a violent criminal history. In 1989, he was convicted in Calgary of attempted murder and sexual assault and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He later attempted to appeal his conviction but was unsuccessful. In the end, Edwards admitted to killing Pauline and pleaded guilty to a charge of manslaughter. He was then sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. At age 41, Stephen Edenfield was a private man who worked for the phone company and kept much of his personal life to himself. He lived in Tampa, Florida, in a condo at the Racket Club complex, just minutes away from his mother, brother, and sister. Though he was close to his family, he rarely shared details about his personal life because this was the 90s and homosexuality wasn't as widely accepted. On the evening of January 31, 1997, Stephen had dinner with his brother and sister before heading out for drinks. He left alone and later returned to his condo just before 1 a.m. As he approached the gated entrance, he realized he had forgotten his remote he needed to enter, but the security guard was nice enough to let him in. He also allowed the car behind Stephen to enter at Stephen's request. Unfortunately, the guard didn't get a good look at the driver of the second vehicle. Shortly after Stephen entered his apartment, neighbors reported hearing a disturbance, furniture breaking, yelling, and cries for help. By 2 a.m., the security guard conducting his routine rounds noticed a shadowy figure lurking near Stephen's apartment. The figure quickly disappeared, and the guard didn't think much of it at the time. The next morning, Stephen failed to show up to his mother's place to take over for his brother James, who was caring for their mother. This was unlike Stephen, and a concerned James began trying to call him, but there was no answer. By 10 a.m., James decided to go check on him. When he pulled into the complex, he noticed Steven's car was still parked in its usual spot. He climbed the stairs to his brother's condo and found the door unlocked. Inside, he was met with a horrifying scene. The apartment was in disarray, furniture overturned and items broken. In the dimly lit bedroom, Steven lay in bed, unresponsive. Blood stained the walls and sheets, and scrawled across the bedroom wall, written in Steven's own blood, was the word greed. Shaken, James ran out to the superintendent's office, barely able to speak, and had them call 911. The brutal nature of the crime suggested a deeply personal attack, yet with no signs of forced entry and few immediate leads, the case quickly went cold. Decades later, in 2022, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit revisited the case utilizing advanced forensic DNA testing conducted by Othram Labs. This renewed effort was funded by a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant and involved forensic genetic genealogy analysis. In 2024, investigators identified an unknown DNA profile that not only linked to Steven's murder, but also to an unsolved 2005 sexual assault case in Illinois. The breakthrough led authorities to Brandon Gliha, a 47-year-old man living in Tampa, Florida. Gliha had recently been arrested on an unrelated forgery warrant out of Illinois in February 2025. While in custody, investigators obtained a DNA sample which matched evidence from the 1997 crime scene. Confronted with the evidence, Gliha confessed to his involvement in Steven's murder. Gliha claimed that a man known only as Chino had picked him up that night and the two went to Steven's condo. He alleged that Chino intended for him to engage in a sexual act with Steven, which left him feeling violated and angry. According to Gliha, an argument ensued between Chino and Steven over money, leading Gliha to throw a porcelain statue at Steven. A struggle followed and Gliha stated that Chino ultimately stabbed Steven to death. Despite his claims of limited involvement, authorities have not indicated if they're searching for the man known only as Chino. Regardless, on February 24, 2025, Gliha was officially charged with first-degree murder with a weapon and robbery with a deadly weapon. He remains in custody without bond. Steven's brother, James, who had discovered the horrifying scene nearly 3 decades earlier, lived to see justice served. However, their mother and sister, both of whom had shared Steven's final evening, passed away before Gliha's arrest. James revealed that their mother had suffered multiple heart attacks and a stroke, believing that the weight of Steven's unsolved murder had contributed to her declining health. After 28 years, the brutal murder of Steven Edenfield has finally been solved, offering a long-awaited sense of closure for those who loved him. However, lingering questions remain about the full circumstances of that fateful night and whether others were involved in the crime. Carla Lowe was born December 10, 1961, and was described by her sister as a good and generous person. In 1983, 21-year-old Carla was living in Pompano Beach. Tragically, on November 13, 1983, she was found deceased in Delray Beach, Florida, near a train station just north of Atlantic Avenue. She had been beaten while waiting for an Amtrak train. Detectives said they searched the area for hours but never found anyone who had seen or heard anything suspicious. Without any further leads, the case would go cold. Then, in 2021, Detective Todd Clancy worked on the case with former detectives from the department and utilized new technology. They were then able to find the suspect. Using new fingerprint technology from UK-based Foster and Freeman Company, it allowed a fingerprint to be identified from a piece of evidence left at the scene. However, police would not name the piece of evidence, saying the case was still under investigation. The device used to crack the case is known as Recover, and it is able to develop fingerprints on difficult surfaces and even from items that have been cleaned to prevent identification. 38 years after her life was cut short, 59-year-old Ralph Williams was arrested for her murder in Jacksonville, Florida on November 30, 2021. He had been a person of interest in the killing for quite some time and was actually arrested the day of her murder on grand theft auto and burglary charges, but could not be connected by evidence to her death. Williams' criminal record shows more than 20 arrests across Florida on charges like burglary, resisting an officer with violence, and robbery with a gun or deadly weapon, among others. Police have not determined a motive yet, but say that some of her belongings were taken, and there is no connection between Williams and Carla, and he remains behind bars at the Duval County Jail and will be extradited to Palm Beach County where the murder occurred. Mary McLaughlin was a mother of 11, described as friendly, trusting, and a happy-go-lucky person. On September 26, 1984, the 58-year-old grandmother spent the evening playing dominoes and having drinks in the Henlon pub, now called the Duck Club, in Glasgow, United Kingdom, in an area known as Glasgow's West End. Her daughter, Catherine, had to leave the pub early to catch a bus home and didn't know this was the last time she would see her mother alive. Mary was seen leaving the pub at 10:45 p.m. to walk less than a mile home to her flat in Partwick where she lived alone. On the way, she made a stop at the Armando's Chip Shop on Dumbarton Road, where she bought cigarettes and fritters and appeared in a happy mood. A local taxi driver who knew Mary, as we may, stated that she walked in front of his taxi carrying her shoes and her hands and a man following behind her. This man, believed to be Graham McGill, struck up a conversation with Mary and walked her back to her Crothy Court block on Laurel Street. Mary's daughter reported that sometimes her mother would invite people back to her flat when she had been drinking. Days earlier, McGill had been granted a weekend release from prison. He had been convicted of rape in 1981 and was in his final weeks of a 6-year sentence, which had been cut in half due to good behavior. He allegedly killed Mary that night and using her keys, which have never been recovered, to lock the door behind him and then returned to prison the next day. 5 days after her death, her son Martin and his then-girlfriend, June Brittle, showed up to her flat for a visit and was shocked by a horrible smell. He kicked the door in June, who has since passed away, entered the flat and discovered the crime scene and came out screaming. Mary's cause of death was strangulation, but with little information beyond this, the case would go cold. Over the years, there were several attempts at developing a profile of the suspect that were unsuccessful. Then in 2019, experts decided to untie a knot in the ligature and examine the area of the knot that had been protected from contamination all those years. That's when they were able to develop a DNA profile that did not belong to Mary. When the profile was run through the Scottish database, police finally had a suspect, Graham McGill. His DNA profile was also found on a cigarette butt, on Mary's dress, and on a bra that he took from the flat, which was later found in a nearby garden. After McGill's conviction, he was also jailed for life in 1999 for a brutal assault with intent to ravish, but released on parole in 2007. On December 4, 2019, 59-year-old sex offender McGill was arrested at his home for Mary's murder. During the investigation, his ex-wife said that in 1988, he confessed to killing a woman he met in a pub after going back to her flat and then threatened to kill her if she ever told anyone. Although he got to live free for 35 years, he was ordered to be imprisoned for at least 14 years. One of her daughters, Gina, wrote a book about her mother to keep her memory alive, titled Diamonds and Pearls. It is named after a lyric in her late mother's favorite song, Little Things Mean a Lot by Kitty Collin. Mary's family waited a long time for justice, and hopefully McGill's arrest will provide them some form of resolution. Nancy Jane Doherty was born May 24, 1948. In 1986, she was a mother of 2 living in Chisholm, Minnesota, and worked at a local nursing home as an aide. She also volunteered as an emergency medical technician for the Chisholm Ambulance Service. On July 16, 1986, at the age of 38, her boyfriend dropped her off at home just after midnight. She had plans to move to the Twin Cities the next day to attend school to become a paramedic. When her boyfriend could not get in touch with her, he asked law enforcement to do a welfare check at her home. That's when they found her deceased inside. She had been physically and sexually abused and strangled. Evidence indicated that a struggle had taken place inside and outside her home. Police would find male DNA from bodily fluids and under her fingernails. Witnesses said that they had heard a woman screaming in the early morning hours but did not report it. DNA was recovered from the scene but did not match anyone in the criminal DNA database. Over the years, Authorities compared over 100 DNA samples from potential suspects, but none resulted in a match. According to old news articles, the case was complicated because Nancy had hosted a party to celebrate her daughter's high school graduation shortly before her death, so there were lots of extra fingerprints and DNA around the house. In 2020, the Chisholm police contracted with Parabon Nanolabs and had hopes of developing new leads using public genealogy databases. This led investigators to Michael Allen Carbo Jr. He was 18 years old at the time of the murder and had lived within a mile of Nancy and went to school with her children. Agents started surveilling Carbo and retrieved trash bags he had thrown into a dumpster outside his Lincoln Square apartment where he lived alone. Taking swabs of paper towels, facial tissues, Q-tips, a beer can, and a slim fast bottle, analysts were able to develop a DNA profile that was consistent with that of the suspect from 1986. Investigators then obtained a DNA sample directly from Carbo with his consent, which again confirmed the match. 52-year-old Carbo was then taken into custody and booked into the St. Louis County Jail in Virginia on probable cause of second-degree murder with $1 million bail. Police say Carbo was never on their radar and hadn't committed any high-level crimes that warranted his DNA being put in the state database. He has lived in Chisholm ever since the murder happened. He has 2 daughters who live in the region and has maintained steady employment nearly 3 decades, most recently working full-time as a care provider at a Chisholm facility for people who suffer from mental illness or brain injuries. He was convicted of burglary charges in 1988 and 1990, in addition to being charged in 2002 and 2007 for careless driving and not having insurance. He allegedly abused drugs and alcohol when he was younger, but has not had any problems with substance abuse in nearly 20 years. Garbo's supervisor at work described him as reliable, friendly, and an outgoing person. His former property manager called him polite, respectful, and fun. Longtime family friends said they'd never seen him angry or violent even when he was drinking or upset. One of his daughters even stated that he was the best father a girl could ask for. His friends said he would help anyone in need even if he didn't know them. This is the first Minnesota cold case solved through the use of genealogy databases, and Carbo is trying to fight it along with the removal of his garbage by detectives as being a violation of his constitutional rights. As of today, he remains in jail awaiting trial. From 1990 to 1999, a serial rapist would terrorize homes in Myers Park, North Carolina. He would break in and sexually assault the females living at the home. During the 90s, the suspect had become dubbed by the media as the Myers Park Rapist. Police say these cases were investigated extensively, and of the 15 cases detectives have connected, 13 of them involved victims under the age of 18. The ammo used by the suspect was unique and similar in nature in nearly each case. In the majority of the cases, he would arm himself with a knife, break into the home, and move the victim to a different location. The initial reported sexual assault happened on June 13, 1990 on Maryland Avenue. The last reported assault occurred on Highview Road on January 9, 1999. With the help of the Sexual Assault Initiative Grant in Parabon Laboratories, forensic genetic genealogy testing allowed police to narrow their suspect list to one person, David Edward Doran. However, Doran died on June 24, 2008 at the age of 67. Officials credited the department's sexual assault cold case unit, which started in 2006, with developing a suspect through a DNA profile. Police in the 90s had trouble identifying a suspect because he wore a ski mask and gloves, and he would leave very little evidence behind. The suspect's race also couldn't be determined because some victims thought he had a Hispanic accent. The investigation picked up again in 2006 when the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department formed its sexual assault cold case unit. Police believed that Duran would be responsible for as many as 50 sexual assaults across the country because he also lived in California, Texas, and Ohio. Police believed Aaron was 49 when he committed his first reported sexual assault in Charlotte, North Carolina, and believe he most likely began his assaults at a younger age. Although he didn't live in Myers Park, his distant family said he was a cat burglar who broke into homes during the night in the area. In 2001, he was convicted for possession of burglary tools, but the DNA sampling database didn't exist then. He was charged with assault to inflict serious injury, but was found not guilty in 2004. He was also charged with a felony for offering a bribe in 2005, but that was dismissed. According to the lead detective in the case, Duran's name never came up during investigations in the 90s. Another suspect, Gilbert McNair, was also dubbed the Myers Park rapist when he was called in 2009, which led Duran's victims to sadly believe that their attacker had been arrested. McNair was convicted of raping 2 women between 1990 and 1997 on Crescent Avenue and also used similar break-in methods as Duran. But there was a difference in the ages of their victims. McNair targeted women 21 to 28 years old, while Duran attacked mostly minors. Thankfully, now Duran's victims now have some closure. Andrea Michelle Bowman was born Alexis Miranda Badger on June 23, 1974 in New Orleans, Louisiana. Her teenage mother was promised by Catholic Charities that her baby would be well cared for by a good family. She was placed in foster care at 5 months old with Dennis and Brenda Bowman of Virginia and would be adopted by them at 21 months old. They would eventually relocate to Michigan. When Andrea was 6 years old, Bowman went to prison for 5 years for intent to perform criminal sexual assault when he attempted to lure and assault a woman in a wooded area in western Michigan. The 18-year-old woman was riding her bicycle when Bowman approached on a motorcycle and tried to force her to walk into the woods. She was able to escape when someone in a truck pulled up to help. He was also the suspect in abducting a 6-year-old girl, and his wife supported him through it all. He also had a criminal record even before adopting Andrea, which disallowed him from being able to join the Navy, but was somehow able to adopt a child. In 1988, at age 14, Andrea told her guidance counselor at her high school that she was fearful of going home. The school involved law enforcement who interviewed her, and she told them Bowman often molested her. However, a social worker returned Andrea to her home and confronted her parents about the allegations. And of course, they refused the allegations, claiming that she was just being rebellious after finding out that she was adopted. Shortly after the allegations were made, the family would move to a very rural area in Hamilton, Michigan. On March 11, 1989, Bowman reported Andrea missing, claiming that he came home from work and noticed that she had stolen $100 from the home before running away. His wife Brenda later increased the amount that was missing to $150. That was enough for police to issue a warrant for Andrea's arrest for larceny, and the warrant listed Dennis as the victim of his daughter's alleged crime. With no foul play suspected, the police quickly classified her as a runaway and passed her case along to the Youth Services Bureau. For the next several months, her adoptive mother made several calls to police in which she stated she had been told of numerous sightings of Andrea, leading to the belief that she was a runaway, though these sightings could not be substantiated. Sadly, Andrea would be dismissed as a runaway for the next 30 years. In 1993, just like Thomas Dean Gibson from my 5 Cold Cases in Oregon video, she was one of several missing children whose photographs were shown in the music video for the Soul Asylum song Runaway Train. In 1998, 10 years after she went missing, Bowman was arrested for breaking and entering the home of a coworker to steal items, including her lingerie. Before his sentencing in the case, he referenced his missing daughter in a letter to the presiding judge, saying, "I am the father of 2 lovely daughters, one 25 and the other 11, and feel that being a parent is one of the most important and sobering things a person can undertake." In November 2019, Dennis Bowman was arrested for the 1980 murder of Kathleen Dull in Norfolk, Virginia. He was extradited back to Virginia in February 2020 to face charges in Dull's murder after DNA linked him to her sexual assault and murder 30 years earlier. In May 2020, he was also charged with Andrea's murder. Prior to his arrest in 2019, the Bowmans went to police to complain that Andrea's biological mother was harassing them and accusing him of her murder. Police took the water bottle that he left at the police station and tested it for DNA. That is how he was linked to Kathleen Dull's murder. Once arrested, he also confessed to other crimes. It wasn't until 2019, after he was arrested in the Virginia cold case, that Brenda supposedly learned what really happened to Andrea. During recorded phone conversations from jail, Bowman described to his wife that he killed Andrea. Several days later, it was announced that skeletal remains had been recovered on 136th Avenue in Hamilton, Michigan, concealed by a thin layer of cement. In order to determine if the victim was indeed Andrea, they tracked down her birth mother, Kathy, who in turn provided her DNA, proving the remains indeed belonged to Andrea, or Alexis as her mother had named her. In February 2021, Bowman's wife testified at a preliminary hearing that her husband confessed to her that he murdered Andrea more than 31 years ago. He stated that he came home on March 11, 1989 to find Andrea had packed a bag and was threatening to tell someone he was molesting her again. He said he slapped her and she fell down the stairs, and so he hid her in a barn before he decided to report her missing. Later, he buried her in the backyard. He said he then reburied her after moving from 4249 Lincoln Road in Holland, Michigan to Hamilton, Michigan as soon as they signed papers on the land. Brenda Bowman testified that Andrea told her one morning that her dad had molested her, and Brenda said she told her she was a liar. Bowman is serving 2 life sentences in a Virginia prison after pleading guilty to raping and killing 25-year-old Kathleen Dole in 1980. In November 2021, Bowman decided to plead not guilty to Andrea's murder, and the trial will apparently carry over into 2022. Shockingly, years after Andrea's disappearance, he taught Sunday school to kindergartners at church as a sex offender. It is speculated that he committed many other sexual assaults and even murders. As of today, Andrea thankfully has her name back and her alleged killer is behind bars. In the 1980s, the community of Eugene, Oregon were baffled and horrified by a string of murders of several women. At the time, they didn't know that it would take nearly 4 decades to find who the monster was that took their lives. On June 5, 1986, the body of 62-year-old Gladys May Hensley was found lying on the floor of her apartment in Eugene. Her apartment showed signs of forced entry and there was evidence of a sexual assault. 2 weeks later, the body of 33-year-old Janice Marie Dickinson was found beneath a tree behind a car dealership's parking lot. Her murder was sexually motivated as well. Detectives believed that the cases were related, but had no clues that could lead to a potential suspect. While police were investigating the 2 women's murders, a man was arrested for attempting to burglarize a woman's apartment in Springfield in the middle of the night named John Bollinger. According to the woman, she had heard her dog barking and went to go check, only to find him peering through her kitchen window. She ran towards the living room and called police, and while she was still on the phone, Bollinger entered the house and attempted to yank the phone from her hands. The woman then started attacking him with the phone and flashlight, causing him to cower to the kitchen and flee, leaving behind a vest and a kitchen knife. A sketch was soon released of him in March 1988. Not long after, Bollinger was arrested and interrogated about the crime, during which he claimed that he had simply knocked on the door and walked away, but as a result of amnesia, could not remember anything after this point. He was subsequently found guilty and given a 5-year prison term. He remained at the Utah State Prison until December 8, 1987, when he was paroled for good behavior, despite already having an extensive criminal record. In 1980, he was arrested for murdering 33-year-old Casey Sorensen in her home at 8044 West 3500 South in Salt Lake City, Utah. Bollinger claimed that he and the victim were having consensual sex that accidentally led to her death, causing him to panic and flee. At the murder trial itself, the main focus was to determine whether Bollinger had strangled Casey intentionally or accidentally. To support their claims that it was accidental, defense attorneys brought in testimony from Dr. Boyd Stevens, a San Francisco-based coroner who said that the woman's death was the result of heart failure caused by compression on her chest. District Attorney Len Payne countered the claim by saying that Balsinger had strangled her after she allegedly insulted him. A judge sentenced Balsinger to only 5 years in prison once again, and he was released on parole on March 7, 1986. Bollinger was paroled to his hometown of Springfield, Oregon, just 3 months before Gladys Hensley was killed. On February 27, 1988, 3 months after his second release from prison, Bollinger broke into the home of 73-year-old Geraldine Spencer Tuhy and murdered her. Geraldine was found the next day by her sister. On March 23, 1988, Bollinger committed suicide at his home in Springfield less than a month after killing Geraldine. At the time, police only knew that he had a history of breaking and entering and that he had taken his own life. He wasn't even a suspect of the murders of Geraldine, Gladys, and Janice. It wouldn't be until the year 2000 that DNA connected the murders of Geraldine, Gladys, and Janice to the same killer. But police still didn't know who the DNA belonged to at the time, and their cases would go cold until 2016. It was then that the Eugene Police Department contacted Parbon Nanolabs, who created a snapshot of the suspect based on DNA extracted from the crime scenes. They received more than 100 tips, but none of them panned out. Over the next few years, police investigated all possible suspects, eventually narrowing it down to 4 people, one of whom was Bollinger. After extensive investigations, they excluded the other suspects via footprints and fingerprints. In February 2022, after 6 years of extensive DNA testing and genealogy research, the Eugene Police Department announced at a press conference that John Charles Bollinger was identified as the killer of the 3 women and that the cases are now officially closed. Janice Rose Bullock, known as Jan, was born in August of 1950. As an adult, she was living in Pearl River County, Mississippi, had 4 daughters, and was going through a divorce. She would end up losing custody of her children to their father in 1974 when she failed to show up for a court hearing regarding the divorce. After this, she never saw her 4 children again. Her family last heard from her when they got a letter from her sometime in 1976. On May 28, 1977, she was personally served in Pearl River County, Mississippi, where they summoned to a appearing court in regards to the custody case. Jan was reportedly working as a waitress at the Dickey's truck stop on Highway 26 in Poplarville, Mississippi. Indications are that she continued to work there until early to mid-1978. After leaving the county in 1978, she apparently worked at various locations on the Gulf Coast and then she disappeared. The circumstances of her disappearance are unclear, but there was no indication of her whereabouts since 1978 until recently when she was shockingly found alive in a Fort Worth, Texas nursing home. For unclear reasons, Jan wasn't reported missing until 2017 when one of her daughters filed the report. Her 4 daughters had been searching for answers for years and submitted DNA in an attempt to find her. In December 2021, investigators discovered that Jan was working in the Raceland area of Lafourche Parish, Louisiana in the late 70s or early 80s at a place called Dupe's Bar. In January 2022, Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers asked the public's help to locate Jan, and someone contacted investigators about her late husband, which led to a possible son living in Texas. Her son, David Streety, was located in Texas and authorities met with him on February 12, 2022. They looked through family photos and possessions, which led them to believe Jan had been living under an alias since 1980. He told them his mother was in a nursing home in Fort Worth and her true identity was confirmed the next day. It has not yet been announced what alias she has been using for the past 40 years. David says he was adopted by his parents from Charity Hospital in New Orleans right after his birth. He says his mom told him she had no living family when questioned about relatives. Despite his shock and anger, David says he still loves his mom. He says Jan and her late husband gave him a good life, and he had a great mother but is now looking to find his birth family. He added that he never had an idea they were not his biological parents and even wonders if he was possibly kidnapped. He is also interested in meeting Jan's 4 biological children that she abandoned before allegedly purchasing or kidnapping David. He was told that Jan and her husband purchased him for $1,000 from his biological parents and raised him as their own. He now doesn't know if that is true and he can't find any records of being adopted. He says his plan is to send his DNA to 23andMe and see what happens. After some speculation that Jan must have left her husband due to abuse, his daughters Mindy and Mary Beth posted on Facebook that their father, although not perfect, was never abusive to his children and raised all of them the best he could, and he remained supportive of them. Lynette Ladner, who is one of Jan's 4 biological daughters, said she has spoken with her mother and thanked Detective Mark Ogden for his hard work to bring this case to a close. She declined to elaborate further, only saying that her mother is ill. Authorities are looking to speak to anyone that knew Jan any time after the late 70s or early 80s, especially in and around Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. This will definitely be a case to continue following for updates. From December to February 2006 in Volusia County, Florida, authorities believed they had a serial killer on Volos and dubbed him the Daytona Beach Killer. 3 women were all found shot and left throughout secluded areas of Daytona during that 2-month period of time, and then 2 more afterwards. All but one of the women had a history of prostitution, were unclothed, and had been killed the same way. On Christmas Eve 2005, 45-year-old Laketta Gunther and her friend Stacy Dittmer made plans to cook Christmas dinner together. However, Laketta had left the apartment that day and never returned. The next morning on Christmas Day, Stacy went searching for her friend. At some point, she noticed some police investigating something in an alley on Beach Street. She would later find out that they were investigating the death of her friend Laketta, who had been killed and left wedged between 2 buildings in a filthy alley. After her death, Stacy put together a poster signed by her friends to hang in the alley, and ironically, one of those signatures belonged to the killer's next victim, Julie Green. Julie Green was 35 years old when she was found on January 14, 2006 on the edge of a construction zone at what is now the Bayberry Lake subdivision off LPGA Boulevard. Julie often hung out at a popular bar in the area called Willie's Place on Madison Avenue, just like Laquetta. On February 24, 2006, there was another victim, 35-year-old Iwona Patton. She was found near Mason and Williamson Avenues. At the time, it was a wooded, undeveloped area, but now it is an entrance to the Daytona Beach Police Department's headquarters. Iwona worked as a nursing assistant and lived in the Holly Hill area. Nearly a year later, 30-year-old Stacy Gage was found in a wooded area off Hancock Boulevard. Stacy was a mother of 2, and although unlike the others, she had no history of sex work, but her murder was similar in nature to the other 3. Police do not have DNA or ballistics evidence from her case to tie her death to the others, but investigators have said due to the similarities, they believe she is definitely linked. Years later, on March 7, 2016, 32-year-old Rachel Bay was found just off the Beeline Highway, about a mile north of Indiantown Road in Palm Beach County. No clothing or identification was found near her. Unlike the other 3 women, Rachel had been strangled to death, and the same DNA was found during autopsy. Using the suspect's DNA profile, genetic genealogists were able to determine who the DNA most likely belonged to and gave his name to investigators. Those investigators then watched the suspect and were able to collect a cigarette he had discarded while waiting on a bus near his home. The DNA was a match to the killer and belonged to Robert Tyrone Hayes. He was a student at Bethune-Cookman University at the time of the slayings and lived on North Flagler Drive in West Palm Beach. He had also worked at the university in the past and at one point held a security officer's license. His home is less than a mile from where Rachel's body was found, and her cell phone pinged near his home for days after her death. He also lived in the area where Julie, Laketta, and Iwona were last seen before their deaths. According to records, he has also lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, Riviera Beach, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, and Daytona Beach, Florida. Hayes was questioned twice by investigators during the initial investigation into the Daytona Beach murders because he owned a .40 caliber gun. He bought the gun in early December 2005, not long before Laketta was shot on Christmas Eve. In March 2006, Hayes told police he had given the gun to his mother, but during his trial, she denied this ever occurred. Police said Hayes also reported a .40 caliber firearm as being stolen from his vehicle in Riviera Beach in December of 2006. In 2019, Hayes was arrested for the murder of Rachel Elizabeth Bay. DNA found on her body matched DNA from Julie and Laketta, and ballistics tests connected him to Iwona's murder. On February 22, 2022, Hayes was found guilty of murdering Laketta, Julie, and Iwona, and will be tried separate for the murder of Rachel Bay. Thankfully, Hayes is behind bars where he belongs and will no longer be able to prey on women. Mary Catherine Edwards was born July 9, 1963 to Lamb and Marianne. In 1995, at the age of 31, she was a beloved and vibrant second-grade teacher living alone in Beaumont, Texas. She had a large circle of friends and a close-knit family and had just moved into a townhouse at 1005 Park Meadow Drive. She was last seen on the evening of Friday, January 13, 1995, After work that day, she arrived home, walked her dog, had a glass of wine, and talked to her boyfriend. However, the next day, her parents grew concerned when she did not respond to any phone calls. They went to her home to check on her, and her father was shocked when he found her in her bathroom. She had been murdered and sexually assaulted. Over the next 26 years, Beaumont police investigators partnered with the Texas Rangers, FBI, and the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office to follow up on tips. In April 2020, investigators began using genetic genealogy to help find a suspect. There was remaining evidence from the crime, and several items were sent to Othram, where scientists eventually developed a DNA extract that was suitable for advanced DNA testing. The DNA was entered into GED-match, and second cousins were identified. The Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program worked with Beaumont Police, led the investigation and creation of family trees and the searching of public records to identify the unknown male from the crime scene. As additional distant family members were discovered, further DNA samples were taken, leading to more than 30 DNA files being voluntarily submitted. With DNA connections from both the paternal and maternal sides of the unknown suspect, he was finally identified as 61-year-old Clayton Bernard Foreman. However, investigators needed Foreman's DNA to finalize the connection and started collecting trash from Foreman's home in an attempt to collect his DNA. When they finally had a sample, it positively matched the DNA found on Mary Catherine's body and the handcuffs at the scene. He was then arrested, and in September of 2021, he was indicted for the capital murder of Mary Catherine. Foreman, who was living in Reynoldsburg, Ohio when he became a suspect, was a former high school classmate of Mary Catherine's, and they were considered to be casual friends at the time of her murder. They both attended the same high school, and she was even a bridesmaid at the wedding of Foreman and his first wife. Additionally, investigators say that the crime against Mary Catherine had similarities to a 1981 sexual assault in Jefferson County of another of Foreman's former high school classmates. In July 1981, he came across a stranded woman at a gas station in the pouring rain and saw that her car was stuck. He offered her a ride home and gained her trust by lying and telling her that he was a police officer. Once in the car, they drove away, and he later stopped the car, bound her hands, same as Mary Catherine, and then sexually assaulted her while holding a knife to her. Foreman, a no-good waste of space, pleaded guilty to the crime and only received 3 years of probation. 14 years later, he would murder Mary Catherine, and there's no telling how many other sexual assaults or even murders he committed over the years. Shockingly, former classmates of his stated that he helped organize the Forest Park High School reunions and attended the last one in 2018. He was even in charge of the reunion tributes to former classmates who had died. Gerald Ray Osborne, who went by JR, sadly went missing at the age of 35. In 2012, he worked for Spear Aero Systems and lived alone in an RV park at 209th West Avenue in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. He was last seen at the Walgreens Pharmacy in Owasso, Oklahoma at 5:35 p.m. on August 28, 2012. The next morning, his blue 1994 Oldsmobile Cutlass was found locked and abandoned in the roadway near Cincinnati Avenue and East 63rd Street in Tulsa. It was towed, but no evidence of foul play was discovered. Records show that his cell phone was used through the early morning hours of August 29, 2012, after which all activity stopped. This is the same day his car was found. Although he had previously struggled with drugs, he had been clean for 2 years by the time of his disappearance, and his family never believed he would have abandoned them. Investigators at the time believed he had possibly met with foul play. He would go missing for the next 10 years until a man was hiking near Oak Cliff Drive on February 15, 2022, and discovered human remains in the remote area. The remains have been identified as JR's, but the cause and manner of death have not yet been released. His body was located not far from where his car had been found when he went missing. Oak Cliff Drive, the area where his body was found, is an offshoot of Cincinnati Avenue in a wooded area north of 66th Street North. Detectives are relieved to finally be able to return Gerald to his family and will continue the investigation to try and determine what led to his untimely death. Alexandra Allie Kemp was born on October 11, 1982 and grew up in Leawood, Kansas, where she lived with her parents and two brothers. At the age of 19, she completed her first year of college at Kansas State University and then returned home to Leawood. She had plans to work a summer job at the local Foxborough pool with her high school boyfriend, Phil Howes, and her brother, Tyler. She was also hoping to spend time with family and friends. On June 18, 2002, worked the early shift before Allie arrived for her afternoon shift. Tyler had agreed to take over around 5 p.m. so Allie could head home and get ready for a date she had planned with Phil. However, when Tyler arrived, Allie was nowhere to be found and the pool was left unattended. Allie's books that she had been reading were still on the table, as was her phone. Tyler knew his sister would never leave the pool unattended, and so after a short search, he called his father in a panic. Their father, Roger Kemp, quickly dropped what he was doing and rushed to the pool. When he arrived, Tyler was still looking for his sister. The two of them continued their search, checking more and more unlikely places. The last place they checked was the pump house, and it was there that he saw what looked like a human leg partially covered with a blue tarp. Roger pulled the tarp away and shockingly discovered his daughter's beaten body. He immediately called 911, and she was rushed to the hospital but would sadly not survive. The medical examiner found her body covered in bruises and marks on her neck indicated that she had been strangled. Investigators began combing the scene, looking for any clues that might lead them to her killer. During their search, they found a small ointment cap, which they believed might have come from a first aid kit. News of her murder began to spread quickly, leading to a crowd at the scene. The police watched the crowd carefully, hoping to spot a nervous or suspicious person, but at the time, nothing came of it. With no options left, they began interviewing everyone that had a connection to Allie. While they interviewed her friends and family, one person really stuck out, her long-term boyfriend, Phil. The two were high school sweethearts, but cut off the relationship when Allie went off to college. However, when she returned for the summer, they started the relationship back up. Detectives quickly learned from Phil that Allie had attempted to contact him just a few hours before her body was discovered. He had a missed call and voicemail from her at 2:52 p.m. He tried to call her back once he saw the message, but she never picked up. As for Phil's movements, he had left his shift at the pool to work his second job before calling in to play video games at a friend's house. Both these activities were corroborated by the people Phil had claimed to be with. He first became aware of the situation when he received a call telling him Allie was in the hospital. Since Phil had a solid alibi, he was quickly ruled out, along with every member of Allie's close friends and family. At this point, investigators were at a loss, but all that would change when a frequent visitor to the pool came forward and told an interesting story. They said a week before the murder, they saw a person hiding in the bushes nearby holding a pair of binoculars. They also got a tip from a lawn crew working nearby who said they saw a beige Ford pickup truck on the day of the murder. They said the truck came and went multiple times that day, which they found strange. Word of the pickup truck began to spread around the small town and led to multiple tips from people claiming to have information on it. However, they were never able to identify it. Investigators would eventually get new information from one of Allie's friends, Laurel. She said that she arrived at the pool around 3:15 p.m. and wanted to surprise her. So, she sat in her car and continuously honked her horn, hoping to get a reaction from Allie, but she never did. Instead, she noticed a man walking out of the pump room. Thinking it was Allie's boss, she panicked and ducked down behind her dashboard. From her hiding place, she continued to watch the man as he walked casually away from the building, waved in her direction, climbed into his vehicle and drove off. Once he had left, Laurel went into the pool area to search for Allie, but left when there was no sign of her. She gave a description of the man and a sketch artist was able to create a composite image. Thanks to her visit, detectives now had a time frame to work with. They already knew that Phil had received a missed call from Allie at 2:52 p.m., and now they had Laurel's visit placed at 3:15 p.m. That left a 23-minute window in which Allie was most likely attacked. After the sketch was released, multiple people began bringing in family photos of people they believed might be the killer. This eventually led them to James Strader, a mechanic who worked 20 minutes away in Olathe, Kansas, and had a striking resemblance to the man in the sketch. However, investigators would leave disappointed because James was working on the day of the murder, a fact that was confirmed by his boss. Investigators continued searching for a suspect, but in the meanwhile, a forensic team began testing the blood that was found on the small ointment cap. While most of the blood at the scene was linked to Ali, the blood found on the cap belonged to an unknown individual. They ran it through Cody's, but unfortunately, there were no matches found. 18 months into the investigation, the leads had basically dried up, so they decided to reach out to the local media. In January 2003, a mugshot appeared on a news broadcast showing a man who was suspected of sexually assaulting 3 women. Detectives on the case recognized the face immediately. It was the mechanic, James Strader, who was ruled out after providing an alibi. However, with this latest news in hand, they decided it was time to take another look. Most importantly, they needed to get a sample of his DNA. Investigators also wanted to bring James in for more questioning, but he eluded the police for 3 long weeks. He was finally apprehended after leaving a gas station in Utah without paying and was immediately pulled over by state police. After being brought in, he agreed that he resembled the sketch, but denied any involvement in the murder. Officers in Utah had also taken a sample of his DNA and uploaded it to the Cody's database, but strangely it wasn't a match and once again he was ruled out. After months had gone by with no suspect in sight, Bob Vesseler with Lamar Advertising decided to donate a billboard for free with information about the murder. After the billboard went up, investigators were given the name of Teddy Hoover by 2 separate people. Teddy resembled the composite image and owned a truck. He also maintained pools for a living but said he never worked on that particular pool. Teddy refused to submit his DNA for testing and asked to speak to his lawyer before agreeing to anything. Teddy's lawyer said he was concerned about his privacy and didn't want his DNA to sit in Cody's. So the officers presented him with a deal. They would test the DNA but would never upload it to the Cody's database. While waiting for Teddy to make a decision, detectives went back through their old notes and made a surprising discovery. Teddy had been at the scene on the day of the murder and had already spoken to detectives. Police notes showed his name listed amongst the bystanders interviewed at the pool. After 3 days of nothing, detectives called Teddy's lawyer, who informed them that his client had taken off. Months would go by with no signs of Teddy anywhere before they finally received an important tip in August 2004. The tip suggested that Teddy Hoover was actually Benjamin Appleby and he had fled to Connecticut. He had been living under the Hoover alias to avoid prosecution for a 1997 sex offense. Thankfully, when he was finally taken in, the Connecticut State Police took a sample of his DNA. However, he continued to deny his involvement. Investigators then decided to put him in the investigation room where they had 2 binders on the table bearing his names. There was also a pin board with his photograph and pictures from the crime scene. Eventually, he broke down crying and admitted to killing Ali. He recounted the events, saying he visited the pool as part of his maintenance work and Ali was there when he stepped into the pump house. Benjamin made a pass at Ali by attempting to touch her, but she pushed him away, causing him to lose control. He also said he planned to sexually assault her and had grabbed the ointment to use in the process, but was interrupted when Laurel began honking her horn. He said he collected himself, leaving calmly and giving her a friendly wave as he walked to his vehicle. The DNA results confirmed Benjamin's confession and he was arrested. However, when he entered the courtroom, he pleaded not guilty and claimed that his confession was coerced. He even accused the police of intimidation and threats against him and his family. However, DNA doesn't lie, so his attorney said he did kill her but claimed it wasn't premeditated. However, based on the evidence, the investigators knew this wasn't true. In the end, Appleby was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 years in jail. After the trial, Ali's parents organized Take Defense, the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, a program that offers self-defense classes for women. Sadly, on April 4, 2022, Roger Kemp passed away at the age of 77. His sudden death left his friends and family devastated, and the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation released the following statement. Throughout the past 20 years, The foundation and the self-defense program have worked in conjunction to successfully train over 70,000 girls and women across the United States, ranging in age from 12 to 90 years. Perry was born on February 22, 1955, to parents Marvin and Jean in Linton, North Dakota. She and her high school sweetheart, Bruce Perry, graduated in 1973 and then married the next year on August 17, 1974. Arliss worked for a Christian youth group, taught Sunday school, and was described as trusting, joyful, and optimistic. Weeks after their marriage, they moved to Palo Alto, California to attend Stanford University. They moved into Quillen Hall in Escondido Village, a residence hall for married couples and partners with children. Bruce was now a second-year pre-med student who also maintained a job in order to support Arliss and himself. However, this caused Arliss to be alone most days, and she would even write friends and family back home saying she felt isolated because Bruce was so busy with school and work. Arliss then got a job as a receptionist at a nearby law firm, and this gave her the outlet she needed. She then began enjoying life in California and finally felt that things were falling into place. At 11:30 p.m. on October 12, 1974, Arliss had some letters she wanted to mail, and so she and Bruce left Quillen Hall and began walking. However, during their walk, they would get into an argument about their car's tire pressure. Arliss then told Bruce that she wanted to go to the church to unwind and have some alone time. After parting ways, Bruce returned home. At 11:50 p.m., Stephen Crawford, who worked security at the church, saw Arliss enter. Two other people in the church also saw Arliss enter, go to a pew, and kneel to pray. When they left, she was still praying. At about 12:10 a.m., Stephen entered the church but didn't see anyone. He announced that he was locking up but never received a response. Not long after, Bruce became concerned when Arliss didn't show back up. So he walked the half-mile to the church to look for her. However, when he arrived, all the doors were locked. He then decided to walk around campus searching for her. After being unable to find her, he returned home and waited until about 3 a.m. before reporting her missing. Bruce told authorities that she may have fallen asleep in the church. So they walked to the church and checked all the doors, but they were locked. They tried calling out to see if anyone was inside, but no one answered. A few hours later, the same security guard returned to the church to open it for the day. When Stephen entered the church, he found Arliss's deceased body and called it in saying, "Hey, we've got a stiff here." She was found lying partially nude on the front pew of the altar with her neck broken and her arms crossed over her chest with a candle in between. She had been beaten, strangled, sexually assaulted, and ultimately murdered with an ice pick. Investigators would also find a latent palm print on one of the candles near her body. It was later said that the crime scene resembled a satanic ritual. Strangely, when the cops arrived to question Bruce, they noticed he was covered in blood. He explained that he suffered from severe nosebleeds whenever he was stressed. Instead of telling Bruce the details of what they found, they asked him to come to the police station for questioning. They questioned him for 2 hours, creating various situations to elicit a reaction from him. For example, Arliss was cheating and he discovered it, or Arliss was pregnant and he was unhappy about it. Bruce voluntarily provided his prints for testing and took a polygraph examination. His prints didn't match the palm print found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test and was no longer considered a suspect. That is, when they finally told him that his wife had been murdered. The FBI got involved and developed a profile of the murderer. They believed the killer was a loner with a military background between the ages of 17 and 22, and that he would collect possessions of his victims as souvenirs. It's also of note that Arliss was missing 2 objects from her possession. Investigators believe Arliss was still in the church with her killer when Stephen came to lock up. Someone passing by the church reported seeing a man with sandy blonde hair enter the church at the same moment Arliss did. Another passerby between 12:15 and 12:30 heard a strange sound coming from inside the church, and when they stopped, the noise also stopped. When Bruce called the police to report Arliss missing, Stephen said he did a sweep of the church around 2 a.m. and the police performed a sweep of the outside around 3 a.m. Strangely, both times, all the doors were found locked. Stephen was initially considered a suspect but was ruled out after he passed a polygraph test, and his palm print didn't match the latent palm print found at the scene. There was some suspicion regarding the Stanford Chapel dean because he also had access to the church, but he passed a polygraph test as well. The handprint was compared to over 100 suspects, but no match was found. Sadly, the case would go unsolved for the next 4 decades. A co-worker of Arliss's at the law firm said that a man with sandy blonde hair and an athletic body had paid her a visit at work. The man and Arliss talked for about 15 minutes, and when Arliss returned, she appeared to be upset. Bruce was also asked about the man but stated he had no idea who the individual could have been. After Arliss' body was returned to Bismarck, North Dakota and buried, someone stole her temporary burial marker. This was strange because it was the only one stolen. This made people wonder if her killer was from Bismarck and had traveled to California to murder her. Part of Bruce's parents' job was to try and convert members of a satanic cult to Christianity. The cult was known as the Process Church of Final Judgment. They were into Scientology and Satanism and were known to perform rituals. 13 years later, in 1987, a book titled The Ultimate Evil, published by Marie Terry, reopened the entire satanic pentagram world once more. He was at odds with the police for dismissing Arliss and the Process Church of Final Judgment and claimed that the man Arliss was arguing with at work the day before she was murdered was a member of the Satanic Church. He further alleged that Arliss purposefully provoked an argument with Bruce to get some alone time with the man. The book became very popular, and he was even able to sell out a 1,000-seat capacity venue where he would sit and discuss the case's theories. In his book, he discusses a theory about her murderer possibly being the serial killer, the son of Sam. In 1978, 4 years after Arliss's murder, David Berkowitz wrote to Arliss's home in North Dakota, claiming that the Process Church of Final Judgment hired a hitman to kill her because she wanted to convert them to Christianity. He told them that the cult was nationwide and that they would kill individuals throughout the country. He knew this because he claimed to be a member himself. He stated that Charles Manson and serial killer Otis Toole were also members. Berkowitz then sent a book to a police officer in North Dakota in 1979, and in the book he wrote, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California, Stanford University. 2 officers from California flew to New York to question Berkowitz about the murder, and after about 30 minutes, he stopped talking and stated he didn't want the other convicts to think he was a snitch. So, the police considered him useless and moved on. Arliss's murder was eventually linked to the murders of 2 other women at Stanford University. People came forward to say they saw the same type of man with sandy blonde hair roaming the area around the time of those murders as well. The police even questioned Ted Bundy, who was frequently in California between 1973 and 1974. However, he was ruled out as a suspect since he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Finally, in 2016, the police received a break in the case. They discovered a DNA profile of a male downed on Arliss's jeans the night she was murdered. Police set out to interview everyone in the vicinity that night and collect DNA samples from each person. With that, they were able to eliminate everyone but the church's night guard, Stephen Crawford. Stephen Crawford, now 72 years old, was a veteran of the United States Air Force who began working as a police officer at Stanford University in the Department of Public Safety in 1971. However, in 1972, a new police chief decided to reorganize the department, and most of the police officers were offered jobs as security guards instead. Stephen despised this and began stealing items such as artworks and books, and eventually left Stanford in 1976. In 1992, his ex-wife reported him for creating a false diploma with a blank certificate obtained from Stanford. He was subsequently prosecuted and arrested for stealing thousands of dollars worth of various items from the university. In the end, he would receive a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. In 1993, he relocated to San Jose, California, where he lived at the Dale Coronado apartment complex. He worked as an insurance adjuster and led a relatively quiet life. Even though his palm print didn't match the one found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test, Crawford had remained a person of interest all those years. They compared his DNA to the DNA recovered on Arliss's jeans, and lo and behold, it was a match. On June 28, 2018, investigators visited Crawford's apartment at 9:05 a.m. Instead of letting them in, he shouted, asking them to wait while he got dressed. The police waited for a few minutes and then entered his apartment using the master key they got from the building manager. After entering, they saw Crawford seated on the bed with a handgun and backed away. After hearing a gunshot, they entered and discovered Crawford on the floor with a self-inflicted wound. Upon searching his apartment, they discovered a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, as well as a handwritten suicide note on his desk written in 2016. When investigators began to reinvestigate him, however, there was no mention of Arliss in the note. Unfortunately, this leaves us with some unanswered questions, such as, was the murder of Arliss part of his revenge against the university? Was she his only victim? Or was he a notorious serial killer who got away with murder for many years? Was the satanic ritual part of his MO or just a way to throw off the investigators? Sadly, we will probably never know the answers to these questions. Terry Ann Seebeck was born on March 31, 1977 in Marion, Illinois. She grew up to be an artist, painting for a living, and eventually met Candace Majors, a Mount Carmel native born in 1981, and the two began a relationship. Candace and Terry were two single mothers living in West Frankfort, Illinois, and wanted to turn their lives around. They both had battled drug addictions but found sobriety with the support of each other. Finally, in 2007, the couple moved in together. Terry was working for her father's painting business while Candace was training to become a radiologist. Their lives finally seemed to be on the right track until one day tragedy struck them both. On October 19, 2009, Terry's aunt called 911 because Terry had missed work and no one could get in touch with her or Candace. Her aunt's on the house where the couple lived, and after arriving, she saw the front door covered in blood and decided to wait for the police to arrive. When police entered the home, they would shockingly find 28-year-old Candace and 32-year-old Terry's deceased bodies. An autopsy determined they were shot execution style by a small caliber handgun. Both of their credit cards and IDs were missing, as was Terry's Chevrolet Impala. However, there were no signs of a break-in and other valuables were left behind. In speaking with the women's friends, detectives learned of another couple, 19-year-old Afton Ferris and 29-year-old Michael Challert, who had been living with them for the past few weeks. Michael was born in 1979 and grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He became a father at the age of 15, and by the time he was an adult, he was drifting around the Midwest, working odd jobs and moving from place to place. He met Terry in West Frankfort, and she allowed him to stay with her for a period of time. Michael returned to Cheyenne in 2008, where he met Afton, who was homeless at the time. She had grown up in foster care and could not hold down a job despite being valedictorian of her high school. Detectives then learned that Candace and Terry had accused Afton and Michael of stealing CDs, a tank top, and other things from them. After discovering this, they asked the couple to move out one day before the murders. Investigators wanted to question the couple, but they were nowhere to be found. They then learned that after being kicked out, they stayed with another friend. That friend told police that Afton and Michael left in the middle of the night and stole his .22 Ruger handgun. A day after the murder, Afton and Michael were named persons of interest. In speaking with Michael's family, they learned his friendship with Terry went back years. Because of this, they found it hard to believe he was behind such brutal acts of violence. During the investigation, officers obtained security camera footage from a local gas station that showed Michael filling up Terry's car and paying for it with Candace's credit card. Activity on Candace's credit card helped investigators track the couple over 1,000 miles away in Larimer County, Colorado. They learned Michael had a friend who lived in a trailer park in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that's where they would find Terry's car parked outside. They then found Afton and Michael and took them into custody. Upon entering the trailer, they found blood-stained clothing belonging to Afton, stolen credit cards, and a black purse containing the murder weapon. A handwritten poem titled Bullets and Weed was found inside Candace's car and signed by Afton. It read, "Seems like we got nowhere to run to and no way to go back. Guess the only way to go is to take this handful of bullets in a pocket full of weed." Another note found inside the car read, "We are sorry we did this. I wish we hadn't done this, but we had been pushed too far. Terry and Candace were thieves and liars, and they continuously stole from one another and blamed it on somebody else, and we continuously got the blame. In her interview with police, Afton admitted to stealing the murder weapon. She said they originally intended to rob Terry and Candace, but they decided to kill them when they got to their house, claiming that they didn't have any other choice. Afton said that in order to gain entrance into the home, Michael told the women he was there to apologize. But instead, after being let in, he gunned them down in cold blood. She said she saw Candace was attempting to escape, so she grabbed her and brought her back in while Michael shot her again. In his interview with police, Michael admitted to murdering the victims with Afton's help. He said he and Afton also planned to take their own lives as well. Following their confessions, Afton and Michael were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Michael pleaded guilty to both counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Afton decided to go to trial, where she was found guilty of murder, home invasion, and armed robbery. She was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Paige Johnson was born on August 28, 1993 in Edgewood, Kentucky. As a teen, she lived in Covington, Kentucky, and was described as outspoken, feisty, and kind. During high school, 16-year-old Paige gave birth to a baby girl and ultimately quit school to care for her new daughter. On September 22, 2010, a few weeks after turning 17, Paige wanted to go out and have some fun. She made plans to go to a house party with 22-year-old Jacob Bumpass. She also made plans to end up at her sister Brittany's house, but she left her cell phone at home and told her sister she would call from a different number to update her on her plans. Brittany kept waiting for Paige to call, but that call never came. She wasn't concerned until Brittany failed to return home the following day. She called her mother Donna Johnson to ask if she'd seen Paige, but she hadn't either. At that point, the family decided to report her missing. When officers initially took the case, they believed that Paige was either still partying somewhere or was just another teen runaway. The police assumed she would return in a couple of days, so they didn't initially take action. Paige's family stayed adamant that Paige was a devoted mother who would have never abandoned her daughter. Since the police weren't being very helpful, the family decided to search for her themselves. They posted flyers, formed search parties, and talked to every person Paige knew, including Jacob, the boy she was with the night she disappeared. Paige's family questioned Jacob about that night, and he told them that he dropped her off at Brittany's house around 1 a.m. and left without looking back. He then initially lied about giving her alcohol, but later admitted to giving her beer. After talking with Paige's family, he quickly lawyered up and stopped cooperating. He stopped participating in searches and never answered another question. A few days after her disappearance, the police finally began their investigation by requesting tips from the public. They then quickly turned their attention to Jacob. He then gave them the same BS story and wouldn't cooperate any further. The police then decided to look at Jacob's cell phone data and noticed his story didn't match. He reportedly dropped Paige off near Brittany's house at 1 a.m. at 15th Street and Scott Street in Covington, but his phone records showed him elsewhere. And at about 4 a.m., his phone pinged near East Fork Lake, about 25 miles away. From that lake, Jacob posted a couple of random updates on Facebook talking about his insomnia and love for fishing. This was strange because Jacob had never posted comments like this before and never did again. The timing was also odd, and it seemed like he was trying to create an alibi. The police then decided to search the lake, but it was over 4,000 acres. They spent weeks looking for Paige or any clue related to the case, but they ended up empty-handed. In 2011, Paige was declared legally dead, allowing her family to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Jacob. However, in court, Jacob kept pleading the fifth, and when asked to take a polygraph test, he refused. It would be another 10 years before the family would finally have some long-awaited answers. During this time, the family kept hearing rumors about Paige being passed out at a party. Multiple people at the party recalled seeing Jacob and another young man carry her out. Finally, in March 2020, almost 10 years after Paige went missing, a married couple who were out deer hunting near the East Fork Lake found some burned human remains. They were found in a wooded area off Mathis Road in Claremont County, Ohio. The police quickly sent a search team and unearthed the remains located 45 minutes from Paige's home in Florence. Because so much time had passed, dental records were used to confirm the remains belonged to Paige. The body was found about 2 miles away from their initial search radius. Interestingly, it was only a mile from where Jacob's phone pinged on the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, they were unable to get enough conclusive evidence due to the body's decomposition to charge Jacob with murder. Instead, they charged him with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. In June 2020, he was indicted but pleaded not guilty. He was released on bond and is currently awaiting trial with the next hearing scheduled for July 2023. At this point, the prosecution may never be able to prove foul play, but they are hopeful they can at least convict Jacob for actively hiding her deceased body. While there are theories about what might have happened to Paige, including drug overdose and sexual assault, the prosecution claims they may never prove foul play. The body had decomposed beyond recognition, and there was insufficient evidence to charge someone with homicide. But the police are confident of one thing. Paige died on Jacob's watch, and he actively concealed the facts. Noma Stamey Cobb was born on November 16, 1962 in Lincoln County, North Carolina. At the age of 29, Nona was a widow with a 3-year-old son named Josh, but due to her struggles with substance abuse, Nona's sister was granted custody of Josh. On July 7, 1992, at 6:15 a.m., Nona was found strangled to death on the northbound side of Interstate 77 near Elkin in Surry County, North Carolina. She was last seen the night before getting into a truck driven by an unidentified man at the Welcome Center on Interstate 85 in Cleveland County. Unfortunately, with very few leads to go on, the case would go unsolved for the next 30 years. About 3 years into the case, investigators suspected the killer might be a truck driver by the name of Sean Patrick Goebel. Goebel had confessed to the murders of Brenda Hadji, Sherry Munger, and Alice Haynes. Goebel of Asheboro, North Carolina targeted sex workers and transported them over state lines before dumping their bodies on different interstates in multiple states. Investigators looked into dozens of murders across several states that matched Goebel's pattern, including Nona's. However, in 1995, they were able to rule him out as a suspect when his DNA didn't match the DNA found on Nona's body. 26 years later, in 2021, investigators got a break in the case after providing DNA found on the victim to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick with Identifiers International. With the use of genetic genealogy, investigators finally had a suspect, 71-year-old Warren Luther Alexander of Diamond Head, Mississippi. On March 27, 2022, Alexander was extradited back to North Carolina and officially charged with Nona's murder. On June 24, 2000, 2 motorists traveling along Flamingo Road near Cooper City, Florida came across a suitcase by the roadside. Inside, they would find the deceased body of a female who was later identified as 35-year-old Kimberly Dietz-Libsey. A couple of weeks later, on August 9, 2000, motorists found a duffel bag discarded by the side of a road near Dania Beach, Florida. Inside was the body of Sia Dimos. On August 30, 2001, a third body was found in Biscayne Bay in Miami, Florida, and was identified as Jessica Good. Jessica's boyfriend would say she had gone to meet a light-skinned Hispanic man but never came back. Each of the victims were murdered, and while they were able to collect fingerprints from 2 of the crime scenes, they were unable to match them to anyone. Their first suspect was Roberto Fernandez, but before he could be arrested, he fled back to Brazil, which does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. In 1996, Fernandez was accused of killing his wife, Danielle Fernandez, in Brazil. On the early morning of November 18, 1996, their neighbors in Londrina, Brazil, were disturbed by domestic dispute coming from their apartment, which ended after at least 6 shots were fired. After notifying the police that Fernandez had fled in his car together with his 5-year-old daughter, officers soon managed to arrest the 31-year-old licensed pilot. His wife, Danielle, was taken to the hospital but would sadly die of her injuries shortly afterward. The murder shocked the locals, who considered the Fernandezes a nice, wholesome family. But after the murder, it was discovered that the scuffle occurred after she caught Fernandez cheating on her with a call girl. Fernandez alleged that during their fight, Daniel had threatened to shoot him with a revolver, causing him to panic and accidentally kill her using his handgun. However, later, prosecutors revealed that the call girl had come by the police station, alleging that Fernandez had attempted to kill her. The woman would say that during her encounter with Fernandez, he started doing drugs and drinking a large amount of alcohol. She said he then started kicking and punching her and even hit her with a water bottle. This eventually spiraled into him attempting to drown her in the motel's bathtub, but she managed to free herself and run towards the door. To counter these accusations, Fernandez and his lawyers claimed that his wife had been drunk and acting irrationally while simultaneously trying to discredit the call girl's testimony. In their account, she was the one who had hit him during their encounter. Despite the conflicting physical evidence against Fernandez, he was ultimately acquitted. Following the verdict, it was alleged that his in-laws were so enraged by the outcome that they hired someone to kill him. Supposedly fearing for his life and wanting to leave his past behind, he fled to the United States and settled in Miami, Florida. Between 1996 and 1999, he worked as a bus driver for a touring company and as a flight attendant at the Miami International Airport. During this time, he continued to frequent call girls. Years later, in 2011, fingerprints that were taken from Fernandez following his wife's death matched the fingerprints found at the crime scenes. Also in 2011, DNA from Jessica's crime scene matched the unknown suspect's DNA found at Sia and Kimberly's crime scenes. So investigators traveled to Brazil in 2011, hoping to talk to Fernandez, only to learn that he possibly died in a plane crash in late 2005 while flying in a Cessna 310 headed from Brazil to Paraguay. However, Broward County investigators felt that Fernandez may have faked his death and wanted to exhume his body to determine if he was truly dead. Nearly a decade later, in late 2020 and early 2021, the body was exhumed, DNA was collected, and it confirmed the remains were, in fact, Roberto Fernandez. Since the DNA linked him to the murders of Sia, Jessica, and Kimberly, they were able to close their cases. However, investigators believe he may have been an active serial killer and could be responsible for other unsolved murders in South Florida and violent crimes against women in Brazil. Jodine Cerrone was born to Art and Lois Cerrone and went by Jody. Jody suffered from mental disabilities but was able to persevere, and she became very active in several social organizations for the mentally disabled. At the age of 39, she was living alone in a condo on the 1900 block of Swallow Lane in Carlsbad, California. While Jody could live by herself, she did depend on her parents for certain things such as driving her to and from appointments. On Valentine's Day of 2007, her parents went out for dinner and a movie. But Lois couldn't enjoy herself because she kept having an ominous feeling about her daughter. When the movie ended at around 10 p.m., her parents decided they would go by and check on her because she wasn't answering her cell phone. The last time they communicated with her was the night before, and they rarely went an entire day without chatting. When Art and Lois knocked on Jody's front door, they received no answer. The couple attempted to use their spare key to enter the condo, but the chain was on the latch. They noticed that all the lights were on and called her name, but once again received no answer. Art forced the door open as their concern grew, ultimately breaking the lock. As they entered the condo, they went to her bedroom and pushed open the door. It was here that they found a man on top of Jody in her bed. Concerned that the stranger was taking the advantage of his daughter, Jody's father told him to get dressed, and he and his wife quickly went to another part of the condo. They weren't sure at the time if they had interrupted Jody and a possible boyfriend, but her parents waited in the living room to allow their daughter a moment of privacy, expecting an embarrassed couple to emerge from the bedroom. While they waited, they happened to notice a pair of men's shoes sitting inside the door of the condo, as if she had asked someone to take them off. After about 10 minutes had passed and there was still no movement coming from the bedroom, and Lois knocked on Jody's bedroom door. After receiving no answer, they slowly opened it, and to their shock, the man was gone and Jody lay motionless on her bed. Art grabbed Jody, placed her on the floor, and began CPR. But it was too late. She was already cold and was later determined to have died at least 10 hours earlier by blunt force trauma to the head and was strangled to death. An investigation of the crime scene could not uncover the killer's entry or exit point. No windows in the bedroom had been broken or forced open, and there was no sign of forced entry at the door. Despite this, investigators refused to rule out a forced entry. As for an exit point, after Art and Lois left the bedroom, they went to a section of the condo where they couldn't see the bedroom door or the front door, indicating that the killer could have snuck out unnoticed. Nothing appeared to be missing, ruling out a robbery gone wrong. Unknown male DNA was found at the crime scene, but there were no matches in Cody's. But it was sufficient enough to identify someone if they were to ever get a match. A neighbor of Jody, Samantha Raymond, would tell police that she saw a man running down an embankment near her apartment on the night that Jody was murdered, but she didn't get a good description of him. There was a lot of speculation that Jody had willingly opened the door for her killer, implying that it could have been someone she knew. Also, told police that he thought he recognized the man as somebody Jody knew through her circle of disabled friends. He said that if it was this man, he didn't have a car and used public transportation or sometimes rode a bicycle. When the man was identified, he provided a DNA sample, but it didn't match the DNA found at the crime scene and he was ruled out. A decade would go by with little to no suspects. Then in 2017, Parabon Nanolabs was able to transform the DNA from the crime scene into a digital image of the suspect. This process, known as phenotyping, predicts an unknown suspect's likely description. According to its analysis, the suspect had fair to light skin, green or blue eyes, blonde or brown hair, and some freckles. He was likely in his 30s to 40s and of Northern European descent. In addition, according to Art and Lois, he was a heavy-set man with a large stomach and messy hair. In November 2018, using forensic genealogy, the suspect was finally identified as David Mabriot. However, they were never able to arrest him because he committed suicide in 2011, 4 years after the murder. Mabriot was a married man with a son who lived a transient lifestyle and had an addiction to meth. He was unwilling to keep a job, lived in and about the area, and had relatives that lived locally. His family never knew of the real monster that was David Mabriot. You can clearly see this in his obituary, where his family speaks of him as a loving and selfless individual and said that he would live on forever in the hearts of those fortunate enough to have had him in their lives. Thankfully, his mother and son cooperated with the investigation. Shockingly, Mabriot had once been a potential suspect in a robbery. During the interrogation, officers asked if they could take his picture and collect his DNA, which he agreed to. He turned out not to be the suspect in the robbery, but his DNA was never entered into Cody's by the Oceanside Police Department. His DNA sat there all this time, and if it had been entered, he could have been caught soon after the murder and could have given Jody justice and her family some much-needed answers. Investigators don't know if Jody and Mabriot knew each other, but they don't believe so. The Sarin family said they were forever grateful to the Carlsbad Police Department for their outstanding efforts in attaining justice in this tragic case. In late 1977, Jane Antunes was a divorced mother of a 13-year-old daughter and was living with her parents in Atascadero, California, while her daughter was living with her father in Oregon. On November 17, 1977, at 7:30 p.m., Jane was on her way to her best friend's home but would never arrive. A witness would later say they saw her pick up an unidentified man in her gold Datsun. The next day, Jane's brother David became concerned when she never arrived home and never made it to her friend's house. Later that day, while searching for Jane, David found his sister in the back seat of her car alongside a dirt road just a mile from her home. She had been bound, sexually assaulted, and suffered a fatal throat wound. Unfortunately, Jane's family had already suffered a tremendous loss in 1965 when Jane's teenage sister died in a car accident. On January 11, 1978, less than 2 months after Jane was found murdered, the the body of another woman was discovered only a few miles away from where Jane was found. 28-year-old Patricia Dyer was found murdered on the floor of her home by a friend who came by to visit. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed with a knife from her kitchen drawer. Patricia worked at the Atascadero State Hospital and lived on Del Rio Road. She had told a friend that she was going to the grocery store and then going home to clean. Friends would say that Patricia would have never allowed a stranger into her home, but they said she always kept a key under the mat outside her front door. This is most likely how the killer gained entry. In both murders, the victims' arms had been bound behind their backs with bindings found at the scene. Because of the similarities, the original case investigators suspected the murders were linked. While the victims did not know each other, they had mutual friends, and both were known to frequent the Tally Ho bar in Atascadero. Additionally, Jane's brother knew Patricia through work. Investigators at the time suspected that Arthur Rudy Martinez, a parolee living in the area, could have possibly been involved. Martinez moved to the area in May 1977, 6 months before Jane's murder. He was working in a nearby welding shop after serving time for attempted murder and sexual assault 10 years earlier, but there was never any direct evidence linking him to the crimes. After Patricia's murder, Martinez fled to Spokane, Washington, where he was once again arrested for a string of robberies and 2 sexual assaults. While Martinez was a strong suspect, investigators had little evidence to work with. He was given a life sentence in late 1978, but escaped prison in 1994 and lived under an assumed name in the Fresno area for 20 years. Though the murder cases had stalled, investigators continued to follow leads as DNA technology advanced. They always suspected that Jane and Patricia were murdered by the same person but were unable to confirm this until 2005. That's when the suspect's DNA was entered into a DNA database and confirmed their theory. While they were able to determine that the DNA from both cases matched, they were unable to determine who the actual suspect was because the database returned no matches. Finally, in 2017, a cold case unit detective examined the case once again and used evidence from the crimes to create a familial DNA search. This DNA search would lead them right to a familiar suspect, Arthur Martinez. However, they quickly learned that Martinez had died in 2014, just 2 months after he turned himself in, 20 years after he escaped custody. He only did this because he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and thought he would receive better treatment while incarcerated. But detectives still needed his DNA to prove he was the killer. So they located his ex-girlfriend that he lived with years earlier in Fresno. To the detective's surprise, the ex-girlfriend still possessed an old razor of his that had remained in her medicine cabinet all those years. It still contained Arthur's DNA, and it matched the DNA found at both crime scenes. In addition, investigators once again interviewed a witness who saw a man walking from the scene of Jane's murder. The same witness was instrumental in helping the original investigators develop a sketch of the suspect. The witness wasn't made aware of the DNA match and had been shown numerous photos over the years, but never a photo of Martinez. When she was finally shown a photo of Martinez, she immediately identified him as the man she saw the night of the murder. 41 years later, San Luis Obispo County Sheriff announced publicly in April 2019 that the killer had been identified and he was responsible for the deaths of both Jane Antunes and Patricia Dyer.